Hello again. It's 3:30, 2025. It's about 4 a.m. in the morning. I just had this most incredible dream of flying. I mean, it was amazing. So let me get started right away. It was central northern Canada, way up in the snowy regions. And my wife, Mira, and I had pulled into this small village. And you could look on the GPS tracker and you could see that it was kind of a really small town. But they had this big metal building that was like the community center. And in the community center, they had like a little, restaurant, and they had an area where there was tables and chairs set up where people could gather. And anyway, we walked in and says, "Hey, do you know of any place that we can stay tonight? Because it's really storming outside. There was about 3 feet of snow, and it was blowing real hard, and the snow was coming down. I mean, it was bad." And the people said, "Yeah, we got this little place you can rent for $500 a month right up here in the corner part of the building." And I says, "Oh, we'll take it," because we were just lucky to find a place to have shelter. And it was real small. And as soon as we moved our stuff in there, I says, "Well, I'm going to go look around." And I heard people laughing and stuff out in the clubhouse past the little teeny restaurant. You walk down the hallway and there's a little place you could order food. And then you went through double doors and you went out to this huge area. It was like a steel warehouse is what it was, but with individual areas built inside. And there were people flying on these green foam mats. They were literally flying in the air and they were all laughing. It was incredible. I said, "You got to be kidding me. People are flying?" And they said, "Yeah, you just got to take one of these green foam mats and kneel down on it and rub your knees up and down real fast, and you literally lift up off the ground." I says, "Oh, you got to be kidding me." So I says, "Well, let me try it." So I grabbed this foam material, and it's kind of like that foam material. Have you ever seen those floating noodles for swimming pools? That type of foam. It was kind of like that, and it was cut into rectangles, and the rectangles were a little on the rough side. It wasn't smooth, so it looked like it had been worn a little bit. So I kneeled down and wanted to start to rub my knees up and down, and all of a sudden I started lifting up off the ground. I got really happy and joyous. I said, "Oh my gosh, I'm flying, I'm flying." And then I kept rubbing my knees up and down even more and more and more, and then I had control of it, and I was actually flying around the building. And I noticed other people were flying around the building. And I noticed that they had either like a rag or an old T-shirt or something on their hands in case they bumped into the ceiling or the walls of the building because the building was old and it was a little dirty. So, and anyway, I flew around a couple times, and all of a sudden I flew by an old friend of mine, Nick Stoikov, who I knew was a Christian, but I knew he went through a lot of rough obstacles in his life, and all of a sudden I saw him fly by me, and he was all happy, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, that's so cool!" And then I noticed off in the distance there was another person that I knew earlier in my life that was a Christian, and they were flying around too. I says, "Wow, this is incredible." So I did it about 3 times. I says, "Oh, I got to go get my wife, Mira. This is awesome." So I went and got her and I brought her out there and I showed her what to do. She got on her mat. She started to lift off the ground. She flew around a little bit once, and then we all kind of landed because the storm outside abated. It wasn't as bad. The wind kind of stopped and the snow was just barely coming down. But when I first started flying, I was thinking to myself, "Oh, this has got to be either static electricity or maybe because it's the storm," because we were so far up into Canada, in the central part of Canada, but we were really far north. And no, all of a sudden the Holy Spirit said to me, he says, "No, this is a sign and a wonder." And oh, I got so happy when he said that to me because it was so cool. But when I got done flying, I looked over, and over in the corner was some elderly people. They were kind of they were all sitting at a table. They were kind of like having a pancake breakfast get together, in one corner, and then there was another group of people on the other side of the building sitting at some tables, and everybody there was happy and joyous. And I said to myself, I says, "Wow, I had so much fun flying. Let me go outside since maybe it's something with the storm because I'd like to fly again." So I went outside, and above the building, they had huge electrical power cable lines going over it. So I had to be careful not to fly into those. But I put the foam on the snow, started rubbing my knees up and down, and boom, I'm off again. I'm flying. One time, did a big circle, and I came back down. And the storm had abated so much that the snow was barely falling. The wind had died down. And I noticed off in the distance that they looked like there was a bake sale going on. They had some people over there and they were selling some stuff. And I told my wife, I says, Mira, I says, hey, let's go over there and grab something to eat. So we walked over there, and inside there was this Asian woman was selling these different type of cookies in her glass case. And one of the cookies looked like it was like walnuts with covered with caramel, and my wife bought the cookie from her, and the woman reached in and only took off one of the nuts off the cookie and gave it to her. And at first, Mira was like, I'm only getting a little bit of the cookie. I'm not getting the whole cookie. And I was a little surprised too. But she ate it and she says, oh my gosh, this is so good. So then I started looking through the case too, and I saw some M&M cookies in there and everything. But as I'm looking, I keep hearing this guy walking through the crowd saying, hey, the Joy of the Lord meetings at Wednesday night at so-and-so's house. And everyone was excited. Because if you've ever experienced the joy of the Lord where God comes down and touches you and you're laughing for hours, it just breaks everything off of you, right? And everyone was excited about Wednesday night. And every once in a while he would walk by and he would announce that. And I turned around from the bake sale, and here's about 8 people. They looked like they were standing, like they were singing Christmas carols, but they were actually singing hymnal songs. And there was a guy leading them, and they were praising the Lord. And I thought to myself, man, this place is like heaven on earth. So I went back into the metal building and I says, well, maybe you can only fly when the storm's really bad. So I looked up on the TV and on the Weather Channel, and it said that this village, this small village, was next to a big lake. And on the other side of the lake, they said, oh, another snowstorm's coming through, and it's got hurricane force winds behind it. And I got so excited because I was like, oh, I'm going to get to fly again. This is great. And so that was, and then when we were out at the bake sale, I kept asking around. I kept, hey, you a real estate agent? Because we'd like to rent a house in town. And they kept saying, no, we don't know anybody. We don't know of any houses for rent. So we just ended up staying in that little teeny place inside the community center. And then that was it. That was the end of the dream. Um, so this is so when I woke up and I started telling the dream to my wife, the Holy Spirit started to reveal to me the interpretation of the dream. He said, son, no matter how bad the storms get in life, I'll always provide shelter for you and your wife. He says, you'll always eat the good of the land because of the bake sale. And he says, the mats that you were on your knees, he says that's because you were praying. He says, when you pray and you seek me, even in the darkest storms of life, you will soar like an eagle and you'll be joyful even during the storm. Because I knew some of these people that I had saw when I was flying around, like Nick Stoikov. I saw him flying by me. He's an old friend of mine, and he really had a rough time. He's been through some really rough obstacles in his life, but he is a Christian. And I saw him fly by me, and I'd never seen the guy so happy in my life, and he was happy as can be. And I looked over and I saw somebody else flying, and they were previously from my life, but I knew they were a Christian, but I can't remember their name. But I think the Lord showed that to me just to make me realize, hey, this is a dream from me, and this is about you walking with me. So he says, so he's telling me, he says that the little mats that people were getting on were like prayer mats where people would get down on their knees and pray. He says, and when the storm was at its strongest is when you would soar like an eagle and you would be at your most happiest. He says, because that's how what I do for my people. He says, you don't have to worry about the storms in life. If you will seek me and pray, you're going to go through the storms easy in life. And not only that, but I'll even give you joy during the storm. So that's what that meant. But everybody in the place was happy. They all loved the Lord. I almost felt like I was in heaven, but because of the storms, I said, "Ah, there's no storms in heaven." So I said, "This can't be heaven." because that's how happy everybody was, and people flying around. And so I went over to the TV monitor, and I was saw that that storm was coming. They said, "Oh, it's coming to get ready to come across the lake, another snowstorm." And he says there's hurricane force winds behind it, and I got all excited. And I'm like, "Lord, what does that mean?" He says because once you learn, he says when you first got on the green mat, you started rubbing your knees up and down. He says you kind of were tottering, you were flying a little bit, but not really good until you kept practicing. And it's like that in your prayer life. He says when you start exercising your prayer life to me and coming into communion with me, even during the hardest storms of life, you're going to really easily soar through them and soar through them joyfully. So when I saw that that storm was coming, I got so excited because I knew I was going to get to fly again. So I thought to myself, the Lord was explaining to me, he says, when you realize that in the darkest times of your life, that I am with you, and not only am I with you in a greater way, but I'm pouring out my provision for you, my joy for you, that you'll almost get to the point where you'll actually look for those hard times in your life because I'm going to show up. So that was basically the dream. Um, I think the part where when we went over to the bake sale and the people were singing hymnal songs and the lady was giving us food, that even though there was snow outside and it was a storm, that God was also saying that even in the darkest times of your life, I'll still provide provision for you. So in the dream, we had shelter, we had provision, we had extreme joy, but we had to do our part, and our part was to pray and to seek Him. But oh, it was amazing. The flying experience was just, I mean, after I had the dream, I just sat here for like 15 minutes, just imagining and picturing it because it was just so incredible. It was just so amazing. That's it. That's the dream. But man, it was weird. And I asked the Lord. I said, why'd you pick Canada of all places? I mean, we were way up in the central part of Canada, way up north in the snow. And he says the reason I picked Canada is because Canada's really, really going through a tough time right now. If you've been following politics with Canada, Canada just elected a guy that doesn't even live in Canada, was living in Britain, and the whole country didn't even get to vote for him to be prime minister. It was only the liberals in the parliament that got to vote for him. And then he just came out publicly and said the relationship between America and Canada is over. So really, Canada is really becoming a dictatorship, or they're becoming part of the deep state, or they're becoming part of the one world government with Europe. They said our friends now are British, are UK and France, and that's really bad news for Canadians in Canada. But I think that's why the Lord placed that particular area of the dream, because he says no matter how bad things get, whether it be government, whether it be the country you're in, whether the storms of life, and even the one coming with hurricane winds, no matter how bad it is, as long as you pray unto me and seek my face, you will soar like an eagle and you'll be full of joy and you'll have everything provided for you. You'll have shelter, you'll have provision, you'll have things to eat. You never have to worry about anything. And man, what an encouraging dream. Oh, it was so incredible. The flying feeling was absolutely incredible. Anyway, that's it. That's the dream. God bless y'all. Love y'all. That was just, thank you, Lord, for the dream. You're amazing. Hey, like I said, ask and you shall receive. You know, if you really want to have dreams and visions from the Lord said in the last days he'd pour out his spirit upon all flesh. All flesh. That means everybody. And he says, your young men shall see visions and your old men shall dream dreams. Well, you can see I'm kind of getting up there in age. So it's amazing all the dreams the Lord's been giving me because I really earnestly asked for this. And just amazing. Anyway, love y'all. I hope you enjoyed that one. It was really, really cool. And I hope you learned something from it too. That getting into prayer, getting into the presence of the one who created you, leaning on him, and the storms in life really won't even feel like a storm because you'll be so happy you'll fly right through them. Anyway, I love you.